mentioning Byron in a Golden Girls episode is definitely going to make me like the episode. Even if Byron wasn't mentioned, I would have thought Love Rose was pretty brilliant. This is the 10th episode of the second season of Golden Girls. It's directed by Terry Hughes, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode and share some thoughts. It starts off with Blanche and Dorothy both getting ready to go on dates, and they ask Rose if they can borrow various items of jewellery, and Rose is just sorting out her recipe box. She feels a little bit sorry for herself that she hasn't had a date in a while, and Blanche suggests she puts an ad in a personals column. And initially Rose isn't really keen on this idea, but then she does decide to do it, and unfortunately she doesn't get any letters, and they spend time in the kitchen talking about Sophia's love life, which makes Rose feel even less positive about herself, and she feels rejected. And the next thing we know, Blanche and Dorothy are in the garden and they're playing a card game, and Rose comes in and she's got a letter. She has received a letter. She is over the moon. Of course she is. And I think this is pretty unpredictable, at least in my opinion. There are a couple of things actually that are unpredictable with this episode. And the first thing is what Blanche reveals to Dorothy once Rose has gone back inside, and that's the fact that Blanche wrote the letter because she felt bad for Rose not receiving any letters, so she decided to write a letter from somebody called Isaac Newton, which I thought was a pretty entertaining choice. And Dorothy's obviously not in favour of this. She doesn't agree with what Blanche did, and I think I'm kind of with Dorothy there. I don't think it was ever going to be a good decision, but Rose is so happy, and the next thing we know, Dorothy has kind of been won around, and Blanche and Dorothy are writing letters at the kitchen table from Isaac Newton, and they're putting poems in them, and I quote from Dorothy, "Actually, Lord Byron writes poems, we just copy them onto loose leaf paper." Mentioning Byron definitely made me very happy. As I said, even if Byron hadn't been mentioned, still would have loved this episode, but definitely something extra that makes it a little bit more perfect for me. And actually, I think pretty much everything Dorothy said in this episode was just fantastic. She had so many great responses to everything. I didn't write them down. I feel like I'd be here all day if I did. But for me, most of the comedy in this episode came from Dorothy. And things seem to be going well enough. But then Rose comes into the kitchen and says that she'd actually like to meet Isaac. Initially, she wasn't really wanting to do that, but she was happy to write to him. But she's clearly become quite smitten. She finds that this person is exactly the kind of person she'd want to spend time with. And that makes perfect sense. Because, of course, Blanche and Dorothy are writing those letters. And I'd argue that they probably know Rose better than most people. So they know how to craft the perfect guy for Rose, and of course this is kind of backfiring. And they're then all getting ready to go to this reception. I love the costumes. Everybody is wearing so much sparkle. I absolutely adore the costumes. And Rose is going to the reception as well, and they think she doesn't have a date. But then she reveals she does have a date. And I love how slowly this exchange played out, because there are so many questions. She says actually she does have a date. She's going with Isaac Newton. And of course, the first question is, how has that happened? And then we realise that she invited him. And then there's the question of, well, how did Dorothy and Blanche not know about that? Because my initial thought is that Rose had written to Isaac to invite him. No, it turns out she'd looked up Isaac in the phone book and she'd found a number for Isaac Q. Newton, and she'd called him and invited him, and because she was so nervous, she basically hurriedly asked him, and he never really got a chance to say anything other than agreeing to going. And we then get a bit more suspense as there's somebody at the door, and I think it's fair to assume that, well, I believed it was Isaac Newton, and it wasn't. It was a character called Willie, or Wilfred Whitney Cheswick, played by Colin, who was actually there for Sophia. And then we have another knock at the door, and it's Isaac Q. Newton, played by Paul Dooley. And things seem to be going quite well, and I think it's very well written, because Rose says things that probably shouldn't make sense to Isaac, since he hasn't actually received any of the letters that she sent, but things still manage to flow quite well. It also helps that this Isaac is not necessarily fully tuned into everything that's going on around him. And I think that that definitely helped to make things flow as well. We then go to the reception. It's a really nice setting. I think it works really well. And Dorothy and Blanche keep trying to tell Rose, but they never get the opportunity. And then Willie abandons Sophia when he finds out she isn't wealthy. Things kind of go downhill for pretty much everybody from there. Because then we have an exchange between Isaac and Rose where the truth begins to come out. And Rose asks him why he's not willing to talk about the letters. And he says, "What letter are you talking about?" And she says, "All of the letters." And I loved his response. He replied, "You mean the alphabet?" Definitely very entertaining. And obviously, Blanche and Dorothy have to tell Rose the truth. And I think Rose did not overreact. I don't for a second agree with what they did. I think their hearts were in the right place, but I think Rose running off to the ladies' room, probably what I would have done in the same situation, to be honest. Well, I probably would have left the building, but I think her response was valid. And we do have quite a moving moment. They go into the ladies' room and Isaac comes in and has a little bit of comedy there. And then Dorothy and Blanche are talking to Rose through the door. And we realise, or I guess it's made very clear, that Rose was just looking for somebody who cared enough about her to talk about these things with her and to say these nice things to her. And she just wanted somebody to take an interest in her. And she does realise that that's exactly what Blanche and Dorothy did. And they do that, and they still do that, and they always will do that, I assume. And that actually they do love her, and they do care about her. And that's why they wrote the letters. And she comes out the bathroom, and then the next thing we know, there's a crowd of women clapping and applauding behind them, which it got very busy very quickly. And it does. In ladies' rooms, it absolutely does. So very realistic, I think, and very funny, but also very moving and very heartwarming. And I think a good lesson as well, that if you are in a similar situation as Blanche and Dorothy, don't let it get that far if you have already begun it, and really don't fake writing letters on somebody else's behalf. It is very funny, very entertaining, but very moving as well. And then you have the mention of Byron, which is the cherry on the icing on the cake. So all things considered, Love, Rose is a pretty decent episode. And needless to say, one that I really thoroughly enjoyed.